Hi everyone, my name is Francis Pisani. I'm a journalist and an essayist, and after covering information technology for Silicon Valley for 15 years, I've traveled around the world and I'm working now on cities, smart and others. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this talk, which is a dive, whose title is A Dive in the Heart of the New World's Innovative Ecosystems, Collaboration, Competition, or co-petition. We have two guests, Carlos Diaz and Dominique Piotet. Please introduce yourself as briefly as possible.
Yes, my name is Carlos Diaz. Very happy to be with you. I live in San Francisco. Right now, I'm not in San Francisco. I'm actually in Paso Robles, that is a wine country near San Francisco. I'm just near San Luis Obispo. And yes, to introduce myself, I'm an entrepreneur. I founded several startups, both in Europe and in the US. I'm about to launch a new startup, but I'm also an investor. I have a fund, and I invest mainly in French funders that are targeting the US market.
Dominique.
And hello, I'm Dominique Piotet. I used to live in San Francisco. I did spend 16 years in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley. I was an entrepreneur. I sold my company, did a few things, and recently I moved to Kiev in Ukraine, where I am right now to be the CEO of UNIT.City, which is one of the largest innovation parks in Europe. And so it's the evening in Kiev, it's the morning in San Francisco, and it's almost the end of the day in Paris. So I think we're covering a wide range of time zones here. That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. We will try to address five issues during this conversation. In an introduction with some definitions and the situation on COVID in your places and the impact on entrepreneurship and innovation. Then Silicon Valley, is it a model, an inspiration, or a mindset? Then the question of financing, the role of GAFAM, and finally, we would like your take on other innovation model or mindset. I will do my best to preserve some time for the people seeing this talk to ask question at the end. You can write down your question on the right hand of the screen, and we will try, if we have time, to find time to answer your question. My first question to our two panelists is, I'm not sure the term that you are using has the same meaning everywhere. So I would like to know what you understand by technology ecosystem. Carlos.
Technology ecosystem, and I'm sure that Dominique will agree with me, but it's a combination of different.
Never assume that.
Excuse me?
Never assume that Dominique.
No, never assume that Dominique will agree with me. I'm sorry, my dog is getting crazy now, but yes. So for me, an ecosystem is a combination of different elements. I would say that the first element to make a tech ecosystem, the first element you need is talents. So you need universities, you need talents in technology. That's the first thing. The second thing is money, capital. That's very important. And by the way, I think that you build an ecosystem when you start mixing talents and capital together. And to make this mix, the cook to mix, these two things together are entrepreneurs. And that's very interesting because I've seen new ecosystem around where you have great talents, you even have capital. France, for example, is a good example of that. But sometimes you're missing the entrepreneurs, the people who are willing really to take a risk and mix, these two things together to create something out of nothing. And that's, for me, the definition of an ecosystem.
Dominique, what is your take on that?
So I actually agree on the two first parts. I think you need talents. I mean, if you don't have talents, you don't have anything. You obviously need money. If you don't have money, then great talent with no money is just cool startups staying in their garages and not getting never ever out of the garage. But I think you need a third element, and I don't know if it's entrepreneurs necessarily. Actually, I think it's what I call a rebellious mind, and really something the willingness to do things differently.
Not getting the situation.
Yes, and it's almost something you cannot escape. It's something, it's in you. You have to do it. It's sometimes I call that the counterculture. Is you want to go against. Instead of going with the flow, you want to go against the flow because you have that vision of the future being against the flow and not going with the flow. And I think the first two components, you can get them. You can buy them. You can buy talent. You can bring talent. You can create universities. You can. It will take a long time, but you can. You can attract money, and I think you can always attract money. And there's ways to tax whatever. But if you don't have that mindset, that crazy spirit, that crazy culture, then nothing will come out of it. And I think this is an amazing thing that Silicon Valley has. I think this is something I see in Kiev. What I don't see in Kiev is money. I see talent. I see culture. I don't see money. I'm looking, but I still don't see the money. But once again, I think that's an easy part to bring.
How do you move from this rebellious spirit to the topic of our talk, which is cooperation, competition, or coopetition?
Okay.
Do you get the question? Yeah, Dominique. Go ahead, Dominique.
I think, counterculture people tend to get together. Think about the hippies in San Francisco in the 70s. I mean, it was kind of a magnet for all the people to come together to be part of that flow. I think there's a strong attraction of people from counterculture to come together, to get together. It's minorities usually have a tendency to feel that they are a bit stronger together. However, that's a good point, because I think there's two things. There's two elements. Competition is often against the rest of the world. And I will take an example. Uber. Uber is definitely a competition against the regulation of the world, the taxi companies of the world, and all the gated system that we had everywhere. But a lot of people had to go in that game to make Uber possible. And so it's not just Uber, it's Bolt, it's tons of other companies that went together. It's Lyft, so it takes a lot of people who are competitors, but who in fact are fighting against the same status quo. And I think that's where I'm starting to see co-petition to build a different world.
Carlos.
Yeah, I think that Dominique is raising a very interesting point when it comes to Silicon Valley. There is, by the way, a very interesting book to read, named From Counterculture to Cyberculture. This book was written by Fred Turner. It's a fascinating book that explains how the culture of Silicon Valley was shaped during the 70s with the homebrew computer club and things like that, with all these hippies. If you think a little bit of what's going on here in Silicon Valley, you can tie that to a lot of things that happened in the 70s. Just give you an example. All these incubators and all these accelerators, these co-working space are just communities, people that decide to join together, okay, to share resources and have the same vision and want to change the world, doing stuff by themselves. So that's very tied, to what happened in the 70s in San Francisco. And like Dominique is saying, I think that the enemy, the competition, is not the other startups, but it's the system. A lot of people around the world are joking and laughing at Silicon Valley when Silicon Valley says we want to make the world a better place. This is not a joke. This is not a marketing sentence. It's something I've been here, for 10 years. And at the beginning, I was very surprised, by that. I thought that it was just a catchphrase, that everybody was saying. But actually, people really believe that. They really want to change the world. They really want to try to make the world a better place. They do not manage, to do it all the time. But it's interesting if you've seen, for example, in Netflix, this documentary, The Social Dilemma. It's fascinating to see that, that yes, they created a monster, but at the beginning, that was not the purpose. The purpose was not to end up, like we have ended up, with these Facebook social networks and other products we have around. So there is this mindset that is a very, very specific mindset that I don't find anywhere else, by the way, in the world. Maybe in Kiev. I haven't visited Kiev, and I would love, to visit Kiev to see if they have this mindset. But it's a pirate, mindset. It's people that are not understood in their own country that goes to Silicon Valley because it's a place where they're going to be listened and where maybe their counter ideas might attract some capital.
I think you are talking about the traditional fairy tale of Silicon Valley. When I arrived there in '95, I interviewed Gary Yang, who was still with his bicycle and his bed in his office, and who told me, I want to become a millionaire and change the world. Since then, many things have changed. The discourse remains the same, but they think obviously much more in making money than in changing the world. But anyway, and there is another thing which is never said about Silicon Valley. We talk about the entrepreneurs, not about the states, the financing which comes from the government, from the State Department, from Pentagon, from the CIA, and so on.
That was at the beginning, Francis. That's not the case anymore. Money is coming from China. That's where the money is coming from today.
Okay, we are moving forward. We are moving forward. And as you are very close to Silicon Valley in your wine country, could you tell us about the impact of COVID, not only on daily life, but how it may affect the evolution of Silicon Valley?
Yeah, it's what's going on since 7 months here in Silicon Valley is very interesting. Silicon Valley is strongly affected by the COVID, not in terms of cases because we have a very low rate, but a lot of people flew away. 10% of the population of San Francisco left, San Francisco. 10%. It's huge. It's 100,000 people, close to 100,000 people who left the city. So all the offices are closed since 7 months. A few restaurants are open, but not that many. Downtown San Francisco is a ghost town with a lot of criminality, and it's not a safe place anymore. So the city has changed, and Silicon Valley in its whole, the Bay Area, has changed a lot, since 7 months. What is very interesting to observe is that, yes, a lot of people have left, but the people who left San Francisco and the Bay Area are mainly tourists. And we had a lot of tourists, in Silicon Valley. Yeah, tourists are people that are here just because the weather is good. I'm not talking, of course, about the real weather, but because the economical weather was good. I'm thinking about corporates, for example. A lot of them try to make some investment, and corporate VCs, we used to call them tourist VCs. It's basically they hear, when the situation is good, but whenever the situation gets a little bit bad, they leave. And that's exactly what's going on right now. But the thought leaders, the real people, and I think that's a very interesting time, right now, because the real people that are shaping the culture, the model of Silicon Valley are still here and very, very active. Just an example of that, there is an app that is very famous, right now in the Bay Area, named Clubhouse, where you have 10,000 people. It's just 10,000 people that join together to have conversation every day. You have the most interesting thought leaders in this app talking every day about the future of Silicon Valley. They're here, and I guarantee you, they're super active. They are thinking very, very hard on how the technology, and that's something obvious. Technology is at the core of our future. Okay, and they understand.
Is Clubhouse open to the people who are listening to us at this moment?
No, it's a private space for now. It's not public. You need to get invited. I can invite you, Francis. I will be more than happy to have you in Clubhouse. But no, for now, it's not public. It's and that's a lot of the critics, right now of Clubhouse is, and you're going to say that again, it's a bubble, Silicon Valley. It's a network of very few people. Yes, you're right. And Clubhouse is private, but it's getting public, but it's taking time, to get public. They want to keep, this network very small and closed for now.
Dominique, how do you see the impact of COVID, if there is any, on the future of innovation in Kiev?
It's interesting because for us it's a little bit the reverse. I'm not saying there is no impact. I mean, of course, we have people were getting sick. The numbers are not good, and so on and so forth. But in fact, we see exactly the reverse. For example, in UNIT.City, I'm full. I don't have any available desk, and I have 3,000 people working in UNIT.City right now. It's going to be 30,000 when we're done, but right now I already have 3,000 people. I have nothing for them, and the next 2 buildings that are going to be open are full. So I think what's happening is, and I see that a lot, I see a lot of remote teams actually working for companies for Silicon Valley, being here and actually growing really fast. And I think we are going to see the beginning of real remote work with of course, maybe a headquarter in San Francisco, and the head and the design and the marketing and the sales, probably in San Francisco or somewhere in the US. But the fact that people can actually really work remotely is a great chance for cities like Kiev, where we have amazing tech talents who are cheaper, who live in amazing conditions, because when you're a developer in Kiev, with your salary, you make in fact more money than if you were in San Francisco. You have a much better lifestyle than if you were in San Francisco. You're not making 120,000. You're making maybe 30,000 or 40,000. But with 40,000 in Kiev, you have a good life. And so I think and companies really understand this here. So of course they work from home, remote, etc. But actually I feel the energy. I feel the resilience of this economy to any type of crisis, actually.
Carlos, how do you see the evolution and the importance of remote?
Yeah, remote is very important. I think that Silicon Valley was very ready, for this situation, because it's not totally new, for Silicon Valley. People used to work from home already. It was kind of it was not a norm. Now it has become the new normal. So you're right, Dominique. A lot of people who left San Francisco didn't leave, the Silicon Valley. They just maybe 100 miles away, and they are still working for Silicon Valley, but they're not in the city anymore. Everybody's working from home. There is a new acronym here that we are talking about. We're not talking about working from home. We are talking about working from anywhere. What is very different than working from home. And I think that if you think a little bit about what's going to happen in the future, is people are going, the moment we can travel again, you're going to see people being much more mobile. And maybe they're going to spend 3 months here and 6 months there and 3 months there, and change their location very often, not only based on, not change the location based on their professional projects, but based on their personal projects, because the professional project can remain the same. I can continue to work for Google, for example, and spend 6 months in Costa Rica, 3 months in France, and 3 months in San Francisco with the same project, or in Kyiv, if I'm from Ukraine, for example, or if I want to visit, this country. So this is something that's going to happen more often, and I think that people in Silicon Valley already embraced this way of living. And of course, when you have kids, it's a little bit more touchy. But even for kids, my kids are doing remote schooling since 7 months. So why being here? It doesn't make any sense. So I'm here, in San Luis Obispo, but I can be I spend time in Los Angeles. The real question is the time zone, I think.
Okay, from where you are, Carlos, is Silicon Valley a model or a mindset, or more of a model or more of a mindset?
And that's a very good question. I tend to believe that it's really a mindset. What I see, right now is the question is not what we used to say before the COVID. To say, question is not basically to be part of it. And being part of the Silicon Valley, you actually, with the COVID, you don't need to be physically in Silicon Valley to be part of the Silicon Valley. If you're part of Clubhouse, you're part of the Silicon Valley. You don't need, and all the people in Clubhouse are not based in Silicon Valley, by the way. There is people from Europe, there is people from everywhere. What do they have in common? They have in common the same mindset. They have the same culture. They think the same way, not the same way, but at least they have some values, common values that bring them together. And I think that the most important, right now is this mindset. And yes, Silicon Valley is a very specific mindset. It will take hours, to try to define, this mindset. But now the good news for the rest of the world is that you don't have to play local anymore. So the question is not where your body is, but where is your mind? And if your mind is connected with these people, then good things are going to happen to you. If you connect it to very old people or very old ecosystem that don't understand, this kind of thing, then you're in trouble.
Dominique, how do you see that from your experience both in Silicon Valley and in Kyiv?
In fact, I think, and it's pretty clear in my head, I think it's both. It's a model and a mindset. And actually, the model is much easier to understand than the mindset. And a lot of people who want to reproduce Silicon Valley are trying to reproduce the model. And actually, the model is not possible to duplicate. It only works in Silicon Valley for a very specific reason. The model is we're going to take a lot of startups, hundreds, thousands of startups, and out of those startups, we're going to create one that is going to be the king of the world, the Facebook, the Apple, the Google, the Twitter. And Silicon Valley is a perfect model to build that. With a VC system, with acceleration, with etc. They go from 30,000 startup to one, and that's a perfect model. And that works extremely well, and that's not duplicable because it requires billions. It requires all the knowledge of Silicon Valley and the experience. But it's also a mindset. And the model is not duplicable, but the mindset is. And the mindset is the one that we mentioned before. It's that mindset of counterculture, is that mindset of breaking the codes. It's a mindset of failing is okay. It's the mind, which is really hard to understand. I mean, failing is not okay for nobody. It's okay, but in Silicon Valley, failing is okay. But it is okay. If you don't have that mindset, you will never create a startup. So in the mindset of reinventing constantly, of etc., and that mindset is hard to duplicate, but it's possible. So what I'm saying is you will never duplicate the model of Silicon Valley, and actually it's not interesting. It works only in one place, super specific, and it will only work in one place. But the mindset, you can get inspired. And actually, this is what we're trying to do in Kyiv, is we're trying to learn from the mindset, not from the model. I have no. I know that Kiev will never produce big unicorns. Actually, if I see unicorns, potential unicorn in Kiev, I will send them to Carlos in Silicon Valley, because this is where they will really become unicorns, not staying in Kiev. And so this is where I really see the difference.
And how can you contribute to adapt, or what are the specifics in Kiev for adapting this notion of mindset to the culture in Kiev?
Well, that's where it's tricky, because in Kiev we have extremely good tech talent, but we don't have the marketing geniuses and the sales geniuses that we have in the US. I mean, in the US they can take a bad cola and call it Coca-Cola and make it a global brand. We don't have that genius here, so we need to bring also, we need to mix. It's always that thinking that you love, Francis. I know the term in French is métissage. I don't know how you call it in English, but I know it's something that
it does not exist exactly.
It doesn't exist exactly. It's mixing.
And maybe bricolage too, which is another French word.
Oh, bricolage! I love bricolage, and see. So those are the thing we're trying to do here.
I would like
but the good news.
Yes.
Yes, just to react on what Dominique and you just said here, that the good news right now is that it was very difficult for you to do that before, because changing your life and moving to Kiev is a very tough decision, to take. I mean, I don't know. I need what is my connection, with Ukraine to decide, to go live there if I don't have any professional project or personal project there. But now, because we are remote, it's much easier, to do. So you can start, bringing thinkers, creative thinkers, to you, and start collaborating with people in Kiev remotely. That's totally possible. And then, because we're going to become more mobile, some of them, because they like, what they are doing with you remotely, maybe are going to decide, because then that's when the connection gets started, to go spend 3 months there to strengthen stuff they've been working on remotely for the last 9 months, for example. So we're going to start, seeing this kind of thing. And I think we have a generation, like how do you call? How would you, I call a legion of people around the world that want to break the system, because what is obvious with the COVID is that this system doesn't work. Okay, our system, our actual system, doesn't work. So we need to invent a new system. I'm not saying that it's going to be Silicon Valley who is going to invent, this new system. It's going to be people from all around the world with a mindset of pirates, and we have to create this legion of people around the world. They might be based in Kiev, they might be based in Paris, they might be based in San Francisco, that decide to join and collaborate online together to create startups from anywhere to change the system.
One thing that could make the diffusion of the mindset easier is that in Silicon Valley, roughly half of the entrepreneurs are born outside of the US.
51%.
And maybe this is a multicultural place, more than anywhere in the US except New York, maybe, certainly. And how do you see the impact of this multicultural basis culture framework in the diffusion of the mindset, both of you?
It's very important for one reason. I've been thinking about that, for many years. I couldn't understand why Silicon Valley was so attractive. And then I realized exactly what you're saying. 51% of the Silicon Valley are born in the US. And that's very important. Why? Because they are advocates in their own country. For just an example, I was one of the first Twitter user back in 2007. Who do you think I tweeted first, with? French people. Of course, my first people I was tweeting with was French because I was from France. So I think that the fact that we have people from all over the world, from all around the world, is creating also kind of a role model is much easier to diffuse, because if, for example, you tell me in Kiev that all the champions have Ukrainian names, I don't relate to these people. They're not mine, you know. I don't have this relationship. No matter where you're coming from, you will find a role model with a culture coming from a country. You have French people very successful. You have German people, Indian people, Chinese people, American people. Everybody can relate to someone in Silicon Valley because there is people from all over the world, and that's what makes, you know, Silicon Valley so unique. So an advice for other ecosystem is bring people. I know that it's kind of it's a counter argument right now where everybody's trying to protect themselves from immigration. That's a total mistake. You should bring people from all over the world because that's a way for you to show the rest of the world that you are interesting.
Dominique, how do you see that in Kiev?
Well, it's very interesting, and actually, it's a very tricky question because I strongly believe, actually, and Carlos loved that term in diasporas. And I think the role of diasporas is enormous in bringing back actually not only money, which is something that is huge actually in Ukraine. I mean, the role of the diaspora, the economic role of the diaspora in Ukraine is enormous. I think it's 5 or 10% of the GDP, if not more. But what I don't see enough, and I think that's part of the Ukrainian culture, is I don't see enough knowledge coming back from this diaspora to Ukraine. There's kind of a tendency. I mean, you know, French people, we will always be French. We hate each other and we love each other. We always together. We travel together. We live together. We eat the same thing. No matter what we do. I mean, I'm in Kiev and I'm surrounded by French people. No matter what I do, and this is my life, and I love it. But I don't see that from Ukrainians. Ukrainians have a tendency. They leave the country. They feel relieved. They send money back to their family, and that's it. And they don't create transnational companies. They don't have that culture of we keep the R&D in Ukraine and we create the headquarter in the US. No, they will bring everybody to the US and they will forget about Ukraine. And that's where we need to change.
One question. You said you had 3,600 people. How many are non-Ukrainian?
35% of the companies in UNIT.City are non-Ukrainian. 35% of the companies. Now, how many people are non-Ukrainian? Not many. Not many.
Yeah, and you know, in France, it's kind of the same. You know, don't be ashamed about that. You know, because the French ecosystem is an ecosystem that I know very well, and I said that, and of course, you know, people don't like, you know, when I say that. The real factor metric you should look at is exactly what you're asking, Francis, is how many foreign people do you have in your country willing to create a startup? Be careful, because you can have a lot of friends told me, yeah, we have a lot of people, you know, that come back to France. Yes, but for what? To spend their money and buy apartments in Paris and don't do anything else? That doesn't count. You need people to come to your country to do something. And if you have people from other countries coming to your country to create something in your country for the rest of the world, not for the country, but for the rest of the world, then you've got something.
So let's move to the next key question, maybe the most important one, financing. How is it evolving according to both your experiences?
Financing,
Carlos.
Listen, there is a ton of money, okay? And with this crisis, and it's always the case, you know, when there is a crisis, the rich people get richer and the poor people get poorer. That's always, you know, this crisis hasn't changed anything. So rich people have a lot of money. and they understood something that is very clear: is that technology is a good space to invest in. They have real estate is not maybe the best, to invest in, right now. Stock exchange, they're already very exposed, to stock exchange and the public markets. So they are willing to invest money, in technology and the private market. So I can see, at least, here, and I think it is kind of the same in Europe as well. There is a lot of private capital for technology. The problem is not the money. The problem is the number of projects and entrepreneurs with interesting projects to invest in. But there is a ton of money.
The question is more about the financing. So Silicon Valley is a mindset and model. It is a source of money. And how do you see, I'll ask Dominique first this aspect of the question, how do you see the importance of the money coming from the US, coming from Silicon Valley in your place?
Yeah, well, for us, it's very clear. When I look at the number from the Ukrainian Association of Capital Risk, 90%, 90% of the money invested in startup in Ukraine comes from the US. Silicon Valley, New York, other places, mostly Silicon Valley. 90%. 10% of the money come from the rest of the world, including Ukraine. So which means that Silicon Valley, I completely understood something. It's not enough to invest in Silicon Valley. They invest everywhere to do acquisition, to invest in and to acquire the team they need, to acquire the companies they need, to invest in the young startup that they see with potential, and that model is here to stay. Which means that it's interesting, but it's also very monopolistic in a way, and not very diversified.
I have an analogy that I use, all the time. Is I tend to compare, Silicon Valley with Hollywood, and I think that Silicon Valley is transitioning to a Hollywood model, right now, where they understood something. It's been a long time since we're not making movies in LA anymore, okay? But the production of movie remains in Hollywood, and I think that for technology, it's exactly the same. We are right now in a new era where, yes, startups might not be built in Silicon Valley anymore, but the investment and they will be created all over the world. That's pretty sure. But the investment are going to come from Silicon Valley, like Hollywood is doing with movies. Netflix, for example, is producing movies and contracting with film directors all over the world. And I think that Silicon Valley is going to switch to this kind of thing. You will have the producers and maybe the screenwriters, in Silicon Valley, but the directors and where the movies are going to be made will be all over the world. So teams will be all over the world.
And it's interesting because we see that in Ukraine. Netflix opened an office in Kyiv and already started shooting tons of movies in Kyiv, which is a really good place to shoot movies because it's nice and it's cheap.
I mentioned at the beginning. I mentioned at the beginning that we would address the question of the role of GAFAM in this financing process briefly, if you can.
GAFAM, if you look at what happened in the last 7 months, that is very interesting, is GAFAM demonstrated that they are super powerful, they have a ton of money, and that they are very important, right now. The world cannot work, right now without Amazon, for example. That's very obvious. Are they monopolistic? Yes, of course. Today, the Department of Justice created a lawsuit against Google for the first time. So yeah, there is a problem. I think that the competition of GAFAM right now are not other companies, they are governments. That's really, if you ask what is the competition of Google, right now, it's the Congress. This is the main competitor of Google.
And the European Union too, maybe. Dominique.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because, and I'm just going to talk about Facebook. Before Ukraine was at war against Russia, Ukraine was, as the Russian world, using QContact, which is the Russian Facebook. And since it is not possible anymore, now Ukraine switched to Facebook because that's the leader of the world. But provide something else, and people would switch. But today, I think the winners are clear.
Listening to you, I hope the rebellion spirit, spirit you were mentioning is not dead. Now we are going to move to questions from the audience. The first one is, I don't know who is the asking the question. What do you think about the Estonian initiative to launch the e-residency for entrepreneurs around the world? How do you think this initiative will shape the future of entrepreneurship?
Very interesting, and I will work on this one because I think Estonia is a very interesting country. Estonia is extremely small, and like extremely small, but very full of talented people, thanks to one company, Skype. And the fact that Skype was an early unicorn and the founder of Skype decided to reinvest in Estonia created a beautiful ecosystem. And the government of Estonia understood that because they're so small, if they want to open that ecosystem, they need to create a virtual ecosystem so people can be part of it. And actually, the president of Ukraine was with me a few minutes ago. That's why I have that beautiful jacket, just to discuss that, because Ukraine is launching what they call Diaz.City, which is exactly the same model. Is how do we invite people to become resident on Ukraine, create companies in Ukraine, hire talent in Ukraine without moving to Ukraine and without dealing with maybe a little bit corrupted laws of Ukraine, but dealing with British laws that are much safer. And I think it's super smart. I think it moves in the right direction of having a virtual world, but connected to the real people and the real talent and access to the real resources. I think it's extremely smart, and we'll do that in other world.
We shoot two birds, with one stone here, because I saw this question about books, and to relate to what Dominique just said, 1 minute before, you have to read a book that is named The Sovereign Citizen. That is exactly about what Estonia is doing, and that's a fantastic book. It was written 20 years ago, where basically citizens are going to choose their own country and their own system, and it's named The Sovereign Citizen. Read this book; fascinating.
Dominique, another book that you would like to recommend?
Yes, a book that I'm actually finishing right now. It's No Rules. The last book from Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, which is about corporate culture and how not to have a corporate culture and not to have any rules is going to actually make your company thrive and keep the A people. Because the problem of a company is when you grow, the talent leave because it's boring to work for a big company. How do you keep the best?
I will finish with a very old book that we have read, at least Dominique and me, which is called The Rainforest. The basic idea is, which you have mentioned all over during this talk, is that you cannot build an innovative ecosystem with a garden which looks like a French garden. It is like a rainforest in which you have weeds which come from everywhere. You don't know when, you don't know where, you don't know how they grow, but you help them grow. And this is the kind of climate that we need. Carlos, Dominique, thank you very much for contributing to the talk with your experiences. And I hope it was helpful for our listeners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.